should international audience be interested in your book, or rather India's urbanization for that matter? And that's how the second chapter was born. I write about 7 political economy trends which I think Indian urbanization will sort of influence globally.
From your vantage points, what are some of the major problems that India needs to overcome in order to advance its global potential in the coming years?
Why is Germany opening its borders for a lot of other people? It's one is, of course, human rights is one concern of it, but there's also other factors involved in it, and that is also hardcore economics, because they know that's how the cities will function. Why is Canada doing it? Why is Australia doing it? And I mean, not that a lot of expats want to move into India right now, but it's not a very remote possibility. Maybe 2 decades later.
It's a pleasure to welcome my friend Devashish to Network Capital to talk about his career, his book, and career principles at large. Public policy is an area that really smart and ambitious professionals in India, in UK, in Europe, all around the world are interested in. And your new book, Devashish, goes into one dimension of it. So quickly tell us what got you interested in policy and what your career has been so far.
And that's an interesting question. Utkarsh, I'm not sure if the most ambitious people go for it, but I think people who really feel that people are at the heart of societies and governments and businesses are the ones who go for public policy. And even if you meet the most impactful business leaders, you'll see that they have a huge sort of stake and say and sway in policy. So one part is that. The other part is that I got interested because, and I don't know how correct it is in these days to say it, but I was really inspired by reading works of Pandit Nehru, and the book is also dedicated to him. I spoke to some member of parliament, and I was like, it's an act of rebel. And then he told me, no, it's not an act of rebel, it's an act of treason. Of course, we were joking about it. But I was really inspired by his works. And that really taught me working that, if you really can do some good work, even one tiny bit of good work in public policy, you can really move the needle for someone in the world, someone in your country, and so on. And that's how the journey started. I would say the journey really started in my undergrad. Uh, and then But back then, I mean, you would remember 15 years ago, there were not many really solid public policy opportunities like you would see like a PMRDF right now, or a LAM fellow, and so on and so forth, right? Even I believe Young India Fellow was launched around 2011-12. You one of the
Yeah, I was the first
right?
part of the first cohort. And
Right.
the focus of that was liberal arts. But you're absolutely right that progressively young professionals have been very interested in exploring
Yeah.
policy as a career, which may have been restricted just to one avenue, which was civil services. But now it seems to be a much broader canvas, so to speak.
Right.
So yeah, give us a background of yourself, and then try and link it with Pandit Nehru and aspirations of India and a wide range of things.
Absolutely. No, I was born and raised in a joint family of like 35, 40 odd people in Lucknow. And you can imagine a UP middle class joint family. It was quite chill back home in Lucknow. But I was like, I was doing pretty good in academics. But I decided that I will not go into engineering because a lot of my cousins and my elder brother also did engineering. So I was like, oh, I'm not going to do engineering. And that's when I heard about a college in Delhi University. It's called Shahid Sukhdev College of Business Studies. Back then,
Yeah,
it was
CBS, right? Yeah.
yeah. Back then, it was not very well known, at least outside Delhi. So for me, it was quite a revelation. I got to know 2 months before the entrance exam. I took the exam, and I got through. That sort of changed the trajectory of my career because I was sitting with the brightest of the Delhi minds, and that's when it was largely a business school. But during the second year of my college, I was reading a lot of Nehru back then, and that's when I decided that probably I want to do something in public policy. And that's when I told one of my professors, and he got really upset. He was like, "This is a place to create investment bankers and CEOs and so on. You've wasted a seat and so on." I said, "I'm really sorry. I would have given it back if I could, but it's done. But irrespective, after that, I started my journey as an equity analyst because someone very wise told me that, you should start working with the markets, understand the markets. Perhaps that's a good step towards public policy course or rather public policy career. I did that. And that's when I also applied for Young India Fellowship. I didn't get through. I think I made through first round. I think I met Karthik Desai for interview. Didn't make the cut. Always jealous of you, Lord, because I think that course is absolutely fantastic. I still think that's one of the best courses that India offers, that 1 year fellowship. So that happened. And during that time, I sort of transitioned. I started volunteering with political parties across the aisle. It was very fascinating for me because both the parties knew that I was working with them, but I did continue working with them. It was all policy work. There was nothing political about my work. And I got to learn from people who were like best in the trade. That started in 2012. Then I became a social political researcher because then I was like, oh, enough of macroeconomics. Now I should get to the villages. So I started working, sort of creating community investment plans for the villages. I was based out of villages for months at end. And that was a fascinating journey. But then I got a chance to be an intern and a speechwriter for Dr. Shashi Tharoor back in 2013. And I jumped on that opportunity as well, of course, did that. And I think I was already working for 5 years now, volunteered with the political parties already, worked on a couple of campaigns. That's when I decided that, okay, it's time to study. So that's when I went to Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. As a Lee Kuan Yew scholar, I went there on full scholarship. Thank God for that school, actually, because they really, really I think I owe a lot of my policy career to LKY. Because if you're in Singapore, like unlike in American colleges, you get out of touch from India. But in Singapore, you were still in touch about what's happening in India, the political economy issues, elections, and so on. So that was very interesting for me. So it's like I never left in some ways. So that was good for me. And after I came back, and there were a couple of things that I was supposed to join in Singapore, but I didn't do that because I got an offer from NITI Aayog, and that's when they had just announced that they're hiring people to write the national policy documents. And the 5-year plans were being discontinued. These will be new documents with a different sort of planning, very reform focused, very progressive, forward looking. Not that 5-year plans were not, but that's what, that was the positioning of those documents. And I got through that team. One of my good achievements is that my name is there in those documents, 3-year action agenda and strategy for New India at 75. I co-wrote those documents with a bunch of stellar people who taught me a lot. Spent 5 years at NITI Aayog, learned from people like Mr. Amitabh Kant, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Dr. Arvind Panagria, and a series of very senior bureaucrats, and who were all very, very generous with their time and knowledge, of course. 5 years went by, done a bunch of things, including massive stakeholder consultations. That is something that I did not realize stakeholder consultations are that fun and that important until I did it at the topmost level for the government of India, where the cabinet was there, where the prime minister was there, and the leading sort of business leaders were there, innovators, think tanks, thought leaders were there. So that is something that I really learned about policy, that, if you really want to write a good policy, just do a stakeholder consultation. 80% of your issues would be weeded out, actually. So that was a good learning there at NITI Aayog. I did that, and then I decided that, I am like sort of getting too much deep into the government and so on. The times have really changed. COVID happened. That's when I took my sort of academic break. The second academic break, I went to Harvard Kennedy School as a Mason Fellow for 1 year. And that was also when I was sort of finalizing my book, doing the final round of editing and so on. I came back last year, and since then I've done a bunch of things and trying to promote this book, which came out this year in February. And if any one of your listeners or of fellow Network Capital members have any query about any aspect of my journey and how they want to approach it, feel free to put them in touch with me. Honestly, I'd be very helpful, because I cannot pay it back, but I can only pay it forward. And there were a lot of people who really helped me in this little journey that I've covered so far.
And I feel your book is one way you've tangibly helped Network Capital members. A lot of them sent us questions, so we're going to go through them today. Talk to us about the origin of the book, the idea, and the process of just discovering if there is a book in this.
Yeah. So what happened was, and this is something I read in the book as well. I was late for a meeting with Dr. Panagria and with a bunch of other as we used to call, we were called, I think, crack team. So people, I mean, the people who were working with the vice chairman and CEO's office, and we were supposed to sort of take a first cut at these chapters, and we were like 45 odd sectors that we're supposed to work on. So I was late for a meeting. So the sectors that I had already worked on were already picked by other people who also had expertise, deep expertise. But since I missed out, I was asked to pick other sectors. And I literally had 10 seconds in front of the vice chairman to think of sectors that I really want to work on. It was and they were all technical sectors. And what I did was I quickly thought about what are the sectors which are binding constraints for India for the next 20, 30 years. So I actually picked up energy. I picked up water resources. I picked up urbanization. I picked up sustainability, and a couple of other sectors, right? And that's how I moved into these sectors. I had not worked on urbanization before, but because I had to write national policy documents, I went looking for resources and books which could teach me a lot so that I can have a decent conversation with the experts themselves. And that's when I realized that there's no book on urbanization of this kind. There are a couple of them, one written by, in fact, two written by Dr. Ishwar Ahluwalia, late Dr. Ishwar Ahluwalia. 2-3 of them were written by Dr. Prasanna Mohanty, who's also given the blurb for the book. But nothing very, very accessible, nothing very, very completely comprehensive that covers all the major urban issues. So that's when I think that was 2016, 17. That's when I did that little research. And that's when I figured that it is a space that one might tap into. But it was not until end of 2018 when I really started seriously thinking about it that, I want to write about it. So that happened. And in terms of how the book, I initially just thought I wanted to write like a 150 page. And as an author, right, there's an optimum number of words that one should do. And that can, have the attention of the readers and so on, as the publishers always tell us. And I went twice that mark because I did not sort of kept myself hostage of what the industry or publishing industry says. I was just thinking of what if someone like me wants to know everything about urbanization, needs to know. And they can disagree with me, they can disagree with the solution or the policy diagnosis. And that would be a welcome thing. But what is something that they should know? And that's when I went on that journey. There was literally like, I wrote, 150K words about it. And chapters got expanded. Like I had a conversation with James Crabtree, and he was an adjunct faculty at LKY Singapore. And he told me that, why should international audience be interested in your book or rather India's urbanization for that matter? And that's how the second chapter was born. I write about 7 political economy trends, which I think Indian urbanization will sort of influence globally. And I go all out on that part. And there's a dear friend of mine who's now in G20. And he was like, Devashish, if I am reading your book, doesn't matter how well I know you, but I would want to understand a bit about political economy and the history of cities before I get into hardcore policy issues. I was like, fair enough. So that's how I got my first chapter. And then I read a couple of good books on cities worldwide. And I realized that you do not jump into policy as is because, it's like talking about operations management, in about a company and just getting right into it, or about a sector getting right into it without sort of telling about the larger sort of impact of it for the economy or the global economy, so to speak, right? And that's when I realized that maybe anecdotes and facts and figures and good fun stories is something that would sort of lure the readers in. They would understand why it's important. Like I start the chapter on urban land by talking about lift and cars. So essentially how cities change horizontally and vertically, that change the nature of urban land for us. And that takes us further, that why we should rethink how we approach urban land, particularly in India. So these are the things you kept on improvising, keep talking to people who are like-minded and people you think that, you cannot stand or you cannot agree with at all. But because they also would push you, if you are having a fair conversation, they would also push you on your own assumptions. And I've been pushed back on my own assumptions about the thesis that I've taken on the book, the solutions I've given in the book, and the canvas, the frameworks that I've been using to sort of diagnose different kind of problems. I mean, the book talks about delimitation. It talks about mayors. It talks about the unsexy urban infra. I mean, we're all talking about metros and flyovers all the time, but talking about sewers and fecal sludge management and affordable rental housing is something that, we don't really talk. I mean, the case as it might be that most of, and I don't know, I can say it for network capital members also, that we all have to acknowledge a privilege, right? A lot of these things we also do not really acknowledge in day-to-day world because, most of us are living in private housing and so on, and we got private solutions to a lot of these public goods issues. But this is something that is important for the larger conversation, and that, that why we're just looking at, when we're talking about economy, we're only talking about national and state economies, and why not city economies, and what, I mean, I was not supposed to write about tourism, but then I realized that, a city can do wonders about tourism. And I mean, Spain, Italy, Portugal, they're classic examples of it, Japan, Korea, and so on and so forth. So anyway, so I've just tried to cover an entire canvas of issues with it. And I'm okay if people are disagreeing with me. I'm happier if people are agreeing with me. But the whole idea is to have all the issues at one place to really elevate the discourse. A couple of weeks ago, someone asked me that, what would make you happy if a book has achieved this one particular thing? Would that make you happy? And I went completely outlandish. I was like, if my book makes cities sexy, if it makes urban policy and, talking about these issues sexy, I'm happy. Because so far as we're having a conversation, I'm very, very confident that the Indian polity and Indian political economy will land up in a good place. And as you would have realized from reading the book, that I'm sort of a quixotic, sort of foolishly romantic when it comes to how I think India is placed for the next coming decades. But yes, the title is a bit alarming. And I want it like that, because in the course of the book, I realized, oh, we are also not doing this. Oh, we are also not doing this. Oh, we are also not doing this. Or if we are doing something wrong on this. And that's why the title came very organically to me. No one else suggested to me. It's not that I was going for something, a mega sort of theme for the book, but it really spoke to me, this title. And I've got good feedback on the title. And I strongly feel that, if we address this part and a couple of other constraints, such as water resources, energy, the gender issue, the tech issues around tech, and which is not one, which is actually, I don't know how to put it in one word, but the multiple issues around tech, then I think we're fairly sorted.
Well, that's really well said. Let's talk about the frameworks that you advance in the book from the lens of problems. So, from your vantage points, what are some of the major problems that India needs to overcome in order to advance its global potential in the coming years?
So around the challenges that it needs to sort around cities or in general?
Cities, from your point of view, because that's what you discussed largely.
Okay, fair. Yeah, I mean, now that would be tricky. It's like picking your favorite kid.
Just talk about whatever the main issues you feel.
Sure. No, I think I'll talk about some mega themes, 5-7 of those themes. I've not thought of those, but let me just think what comes to my mind right away. First of all, urban governance. It's massive issue in terms of and I know that you worked on villages. You created one of the first smart villages in India. That if you go to a village, really who the sarpanch is, who's really where the panchayat bhavan is, whom to sort of reach out to solve for what issue, and so on and so forth. We don't really know that about cities, right? We do not have elected mayors in most of the cities. The tenures is very, very tiny. They do not have any real powers. Urban local bodies are not getting the functions that were mentioned in the 12th schedule. And this is something not the state governments, the central government can do anything about it. It's the state governments that need to part away with it. The rural political, so that is one part of it. The other part of it is that the Indian political economy is very sort of lopsided in the favor of rural political economy. I mean, I don't know, 80-85% of the budget goes into rural political economy. Well, that might have been good for until a couple of decades ago, but not anymore now. I think there needs to be a serious balance. And I quote some figures that show that in some major schemes, the rural share gets way too much money as compared to the urban counterparts. So that is the second part. The third is that for far too long, we have looked at cities as largely a spatial identity, like a physical manifestation, right? Or just the physical being. But actually, is the physical manifestation of economic activities. We should understand the process. The purpose of cities essentially is not that you come, live, and work, and that's about it. It essentially is to innovate, is to progress, and to meet the finest minds, to have a chance of upward mobility, to have a chance at better shot at life, and to be able to do whatever the hell you want to do in your life. And that's the opportunity that only cities can give you. Because unlike the rural structure where, a lot of your sort of assigned as in identities, uh, assumed identities and inherited identities sort of define what you can do and how far you can go. In cities, what really matters is uh, what you can do, how well can you do, and for what wage will you do it, essentially. And that's all that matters. And as it should be. And that's why I think, and I'm banking on Indian cities to solve a lot of legacy issues that have been existing in the Indian political economy, whether it comes to caste or gender issues or religion issues and so on and so forth. So that's the other part. The other thing that I really feel about cities is that we're not really, we have not been able to, like a lot of other countries have been able to evolve this concept of urban land that we have not been able to do. And I think
Yeah.
we'll be sitting on a gold mine there. Like China's transformation of the last 30 years was largely financed by urban land sort of monetization by their local bodies. And that's how they, and I give an example of the Pudong area that was completely sort of financed by monetization of the urban land banks. And I think this is what Indian cities should also look at. We should sort of think creatively about cities and so on. So that is one thing. And and one last thing I want to conclude on, and these are all mega issues, right? And I mean, we can dwell on these issues for days at end. But the other issue that I really feel about Indian cities is that we're not giving its due. I mean, it's just that we are stuck. And I mean, while it has become fashionable to berate Mahatma Gandhi, I intend no such thing. But I do say that, he said back in the day that the heart of India lives in its villages, which was fair because 10% of India was urban, and he needed to link the urban elites with the rural masses to sort of, hurt the British Empire where he can and where he did. But now it's not the case that more, and we're still sort of romanticizing that. And the heart of the India is not really in the villages, actually, and the heart of those people is also not in these villages. We should understand that, and 2020 taught us something that, 10 million people, and there's one of the conservative estimates that were given in the parliament, were sort of affected, the migrants that were affected during the lockdown. And probably much more was the figure. The real figure was much more, right? And I have seen a lot of leading, I mean, I really should not be naming those policymakers, those ultra rich billionaires and innovators and so on, who said, oh no, we should stop migration, and we should find a way there where people should be in their villages and so on. And it is so sad. It is so sad because someone in your family, couple of generations ago, moved to a city, and now you have become what you've become, and you're denying others the opportunity. So I think migration is really, really good. Slums are a good indicator. And I know this might seem counterintuitive to some, but slum is good because it shows that someone who already has 5 acres of land and can very well be very comfortable in his village is still willing to live in a slum in a city like Bombay or Delhi, is because he or she still thinks that they have a better opportunity or a better chance at life in living in this slum. And I'm also not condoning that, we should not improvise slums or sort of redevelop them and so on. People should, because they are less skilled and they do not earn much, it's fair. I mean, they can come live in slums for a bit, but we should also find ways where people are sort of, their skills are upgraded, they're given more opportunities, they move on to better places of living. But I don't see the slums in India going down anytime soon. I mean, we are sitting at a massive, massive churn. In fact, I say that this is the biggest sort of demographic change that is happening worldwide apart from the aging population. So one is aging population that is happening worldwide. The other is hundreds of millions of people are moving into Indian cities. The Chinese transition has already happened. And all these models, the Chinese model before that was East Asian, prior to that, there was a bit of Latin American, and prior to that, it was North American, and prior to that, it was European, and so on. 300 years of this sort of change, which is now concluding in India, and probably it will be taken forward by some African countries, such as Nigeria. We are seeing a major demographic change, and all these sort of transitions in all these different countries created a different kind of urbanization and different kind of cities. And I'm sure India is already creating its different kind of cities and urbanization, which the world can learn from, and which will be building on the previous experiences of other countries and civilizations. if I can go that far. I know
Well,
it's sort of projecting a lot, but these are my like top thoughts.
but there's a lot to discuss and debate and agree and disagree with you, Devashish. But before I move to the next segment, I'm going to invite one of our patrons to ask you and throw the spotlight on him. So, Bhanu, the next minute or two, feel free to ask and disagree or debate with Devashish.
Thanks, Utkarsh. Thanks, Devashish, for coming onto this platform. Uh, I I particularly love the book and the idea of the book. I mean, this is really a call for governance, a call for opportunity. If we don't get it right, then there is a big problem for us as a nation and maybe for the whole world. If India fails, the world largely fails, right? And same, in another 10, 15 years, we will be talking about the same thing in Africa as well. Exactly the same blueprint will replicate, right? I love the heading of the first chapter, right? The humankind's longest experiment. That's a brilliant title for the chapter there. One other thing I wanted to understand is that you looked at cities from various points of views, and those led to different chapters and stuff like that. One other thing which I felt a little bit under addressed and wanted to get your idea on about it. Have you thought about it or didn't think about it? Have you thought about it and left it? Just your thinking as an author on that dimension. When we look at cities, I mean, you rightly point out that cities are the places where the bleeding edge of liberalization takes place in terms of mindset, thought process, and all that. But at the same time, cities also have been the bulwarks for movements and campaigns, at various points in time. You look at the Tiananmen Square, you look at the Mandal Reservation, you look at any big, movement or campaign, largely, except few which might have originated from the rural segments, but big movements really take their, I mean, they might have started wherever, but they take their grounding in some big cities and then get catapulted across the world or even across the countries, right? So just wanted to understand that aspect of cities. The second question I had was, one of the things which is slightly missing in the cities is the feeling of community, right? I mean, cities are growing, everything is growing, but again, the co-living community kind of factor is sort of on a diminishing decline, right? So just wanted to understand these two dimensions of cities and your thoughts, having thought about cities in so many different dimensions.
Absolutely. No, so on the episode of, I mean, I actually, there was a section in the book, which I was something around at I think it was called In the Eye of the Storm or something, that it was eventually sort of, it was phased out, it was edited out, that section. But I actually have taken a very strong view, and I completely agree. And this is the view that the book has taken. In fact, let me say a lot of big campaigns do not only get consolidated, but they see the fruition in cities largely. In fact, that is the backdrop against which these campaigns gain their best momentum. Now, I go on to say, and it's part of the first chapter itself, it says that Buddhism and Jainism, India received those two very progressive religions when the urban churn was at its best at one point of time, right? In the history of India. One is that. The other is, I also go on to say that, communism got defeated and capitalism still continues its upwards and forward sort of march, is because capitalism is largely an urban movement, communism was largely in a rural movement, and it really shows that, that the urban movement has sort of overcame the rural movement. So one is that. I also say that, that campaign also was fought. Then there is, if you read the second chapter, there is about that Indian cities will decide what will happen to the global liberalism and conservatism, not just economic, but also social conservatism and liberalism. Similarly, economic as well. So I again say that the cities will be theater where all this will be fought. And then I talk about caste and gender sort of emancipation from these caste and gender issues happening, also being fought in cities, being won in cities also. And that's why I say that Me Too, there's a whole paragraph around this, that Me Too would not have been possible if it wasn't for decently functioning cities. Because, the women got an opportunity. I mean, universal suffragette also happened in cities. I mean, there are at multiple points. I mean, there was a dedicated section initially, and that was part of the first chapter. But now it's sort of got edited out. But I completely agree to your point, and I time and again bring up multiple campaigns which were won because they were fought in cities, or the way they were fought in cities, first of all. So completely agree on that part, Banu. And the second part about the feeling of community, I think there are two comparisons to be made. The feeling of community in a well-functioning city and feeling of community in a poorly functioning city. One is that, one comparison we can draw that. The other comparison we can draw is the sense of community in a city and a sense of community in a village. Now, you cannot get the village kind of sense of community in a city because the functions are different. The rural sort of you get a village because there was an agriculture surplus and you decided that you can live here and you can harvest here, and that's the end of it, right? And then there's some bare minimum innovations that happened there and you are okay with it, right? So that is the rural part, because there's no migration that happens. There is no specialization of skills that happen. There is no upward mobility that happens. There's no wage increase. There's no innovation because there's no fostering of ideas. And all this not happens because there is no migration, right? And that's why, like, centuries and centuries, you can literally go to a village and you can ask about someone and they will tell you about the all 10 generations of that particular family, right? It's not uncommon. But in a city, it is difficult to tell because people are migrating in and out all the time. What really matters is that cities like Singapore, they create a sense of community. How? To the Housing Development Board, they have created housing in a manner where the racial or the ethnic tensions are the minimum. They've ensured that, it's a mixed housing for different kind of groups, and there's more increased trust, and there's a sense of community when it comes to the city state, right? So you can have a sense of, so the interpersonal sense of community might be difficult to come by, but sense of community might be easier to come by when it comes to the larger city. And how will it happen? It will happen because suppose if I'll ask Utkarsh, or if I ask you in a second that, oh, where are you guys from? I mean, in all probability, you will pick a city. You will not tell a state, right? And even if your global peers would ask you, where are you from? You'll say, oh, I'm from this part of India, in this city, right? I don't know if you've heard of it, but this part of India, right? But why do we do that? Because there's a sense of belongingness, there's a sense of community about a city. Now, I come from Lucknow. I have a very, very strong sense of affinity and community when it comes to my city. But the deal is now that thing is also declining a bit because of the urban design issues. Now the cities in East Asia looking to cities in South Asia, which are looking to similar to cities in North America and Latin America and so on. I mean, and that is an urban design problem. It is something that I've highlighted in the book as well. So sense of community will come, but it has to be with the city first. And second, you have to ensure that there are no trust issues. And then depends on how long people live, they will have their own sort of sense of community. I mean, you live in Italy, you live in Florence or Milan, if you live in Barcelona, you will very strongly identify with certain kind of traits. And that's why different cities attract different kind of people. I mean, New Yorkers are different. And I mean, they will identify immediately, oh, you're a fellow New Yorker. And then they will sort of work accordingly and they will act accordingly. So there's a sense of community with the city and with the people, depending upon how well the urban design is, how less the trust deficit is, and so on and so forth. So sorry, it's a long answer to both your questions, but
Thanks for elaborating, Devashish. Thank you. Over to you, Utkarsh.
But did that answer your question, Ban? Do you have any sort of
Yes. See, I mean, I like the way you explained community, that there is a community feeling in the city, but it's slightly different from the way it traditionally used to be, right? And I think that's an important point to make. And then you really said that community, that the city community nature or the identity of belonging to the city actually comes either gets boosted or impeded by how well the city is being run and how well the city is actually growing, and the pride to be attached with the city, or after a while you feel shy of saying I belong to that city, right? We've seen that situation happen as well, right?
Yeah. And also because there are two fundamental forces at sort of conflict, because the rural political economy would ask you to stay fixated in that particular place. And by the way, my book doesn't intend to do village bashing. The book essentially says that what is needed for India, for for us to achieve whatever the promised destiny we all speak to about it ourselves and among each other, with each other. But the force of cities essentially comes from agglomeration and migration.
Right.
And the best performing cities, worldwide, if you look at it, I mean, why is Germany opening its borders for a lot of other people? It's one is, of course, human rights is one concern of it, but there's also other factors involved in it, and that is also hardcore economics, because they know that's how the cities will function. Why is Canada doing it? Why is Australia doing it? And I mean, not that a lot of expats want to move into India right now, but it's not a very remote possibility, maybe 2 decades later. I mean, we know that people have been trying to move to Goa for a number of decades now, right? And it attracts certain kind of the people worldwide. And that's what, and the migration and being fixated in your own sort of place of origin is a fundamental sort of, they're in fundamental tension, and we cannot avoid that.
Thanks, Devashish. Over to you, Utkarsh.
Thanks, Val.
Thank you. Talk to us about some of the other bigger ideas you advance in the book, particularly related to the future of India and how you see them. So one is about cities and how they exist. Talk to us about some of the points that are linked to it or maybe different.
Yeah, so I mean, I also don't want to come across as an urban apologist. So I've picked up there are a couple of cases where I've said that, how cities have failed in some ways. But I've said that the more Indian cities sort of succeed, they would be at much more threat, because you project power through those cities. So the more and more, I mean, the 90s blast in Bombay, the 2008 attack, I guess it was, in Bombay again, was happened because you're trying to instill fear in people. So the safety concerns are going to increase a lot more. So that is something inevitable that I think that is going to happen, because the more and more, because just not one Bombay and Delhi now, there are going to be a lot of big cities now. And we already have 53 metropolitan cities, and it's one estimate said that we have not done a 2021 census, but it said we're going to have 85 plus 90 plus metropolitan cities, or we might be already on that actually. So one is that figure. The other figure is that we are way more urban than we actually recognize. So it is in the last part of the book on urban governance, and it essentially says that our definition of what is urban is very, very stringent as compared to the global peers. And also states also define urban very differently, and they do it. So what states define as urban is statutory towns. What the census define is census towns. Now, if you go back to 2011, and the sense and the results I think were released in 2013 or 14. So so that says that as per census, we are 31%. We are 31% as urban. As per statutory towns, we are 26% urban. If you go by the population, the 5% difference alone makes up for 12 Singapores.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, imagine. I mean, what are we doing, right? And then there are also, like, I mean, there has to be certain. We need to realize that, why is this not happening? Like, it's easy to say that, we should we should have a level definition of urban, but a lot of funds are tied to the rural sort of counterparts. So unless you sort of liberalize that part, the states will continue to be very sort of hesitant on defining what is urban, what is rural, right? And the problem with that is that, the infrastructure that is commensurate to an urban center as compared to a rural center is very, very different. And it's something as basic as the width of the roads, or whether there will be sewerage line or not, and so on and so forth. So that all these are very problematic issues which create further legacy issues, and then there's no end to it. So probably we'll have to take a stock when the delimitation happened, which hasn't happened since 1976. So the way the delimitation will happen the states which are much more urbanized will get lesser seats, right? So in that way, we'll also further sort of penalize the states which are sort of urbanizing fast and actually giving much more wage growth and innovation, which is largely the southern states. It's already a very politically contentious issue, but it's something that we have to look in terms of how we want to see India 20, 30 years down the line. So that is one other concern. One other thing that I really look at it, one other sort of mega trend is that yes, the climate change, I mean, because cities are epicenter of economic activity, so they're of course also biggest greenhouse gas emitters and so on. But we have to see that the Indian form of urbanization is way more energy efficient. In fact, it's very, very resource efficient. And we have shown the world, we are I don't know about the status right now, but until a couple of months ago, we were the only G20 country who was sort of on course to meet the Paris sort of agreement that reducing the energy efficiency by 30-35%, right, from the 2005 levels. And that is Indian urbanization. We have through the schemes like Ujala, through EESL, through ESCOs, energy saving companies, and so on. We have really shown world a model of sort of decoupling economic growth and energy consumption. And I go on to say that, maybe it's time to sort of think about water saving companies. And like just we have a Bureau of Energy Efficiency, we should have Bureau for Water Efficiency and so on. The only point I make about rural political economy in terms of my policy recommendation is groundwater, because groundwater aquifers that do not know any administrative sort of limitations. They are aquifers under the ground. So we have to figure that out. And the problem to that thing is it's a colonial era act, Easement Act 1882 and so on, where basically it says that apart from oil, anything found under my land is mine, and I can use it whatever the way I want to. But you cannot do it. You have to sort of work on the Gandhian sort of maximum of public trust that, or the custodian, that we are the custodian of the resources and so on. So we cannot keep on depleting it as much as we can. So there has to be a sense of community when it comes to groundwater. These are very unsexy topics, but honestly, these are the binding constraints about our cities. You cannot have Northern India might be very, very used to listening to this term, that you cannot switch on a motor and keep on pumping groundwater day in, night out. You can't do that, because then you're contaminating water. And look at what's happening to the Western UP in terms of pollution of the groundwater resources. And now there are different kind of diseases that those guys are suffering. And these are all urban issues. You cannot say that, oh, it's completely rural. You cannot blame it on rural folks alone. I mean, it happens, a lot of wasteful, and you have to do it like for every 1 liter of RO water in what the technology that we have, you have 7 liters of wastewater. What are you going to do with that 7 liters of wastewater, 1 liter that you're only drinking? What are you going to do about that? Right? The flushing systems, they're so water inefficient, right? And you all these things need to come into play, because you have to provide. The problem with water supply in India and in the urban areas is 4 problems, right? It's a poor quality, it's non-revenue, the maintenance is not done, and there's barely any universal network coverage, right? So that is the water part. I can go on to other issues like, I mean, there are people moving in, and it's just one tiny section of the book. It's like people moving in, and why Surat was the first city to immediately adopt what's launched in the COVID by the central government was affordable rental housing complex, because Surat has 60%, more than 60% of the people are migrants. Yeah. And they have to do it. They realize that if they don't do it, because Surat was one of the cities that saw some, not riots, but some tensions because the migrants had to move back, and during COVID, there was some problem. So they immediately had to adopt, although they adopted for what, 400 units? That's barely anything, right? So there are a lot of cities. A lot of Indian cities will be bigger than the size of the current mid-sized economies by 2035. So, I mean, you have to think literally at those levels. Kuala Lumpur created a $500 million sort of a tunnel, which works as a traveling sort of tunnel to sort of move out of Kuala Lumpur, but also works during flood water. It has prevented, I don't know, 3 or 5 flash floods in Kuala Lumpur over the last 4, 5, 7 years. But it's $500 million, and it's just for one city alone. Kuala Lumpur could do it. It's petro money, right? But I'm just saying that, but are we providing even a fraction of that kind of infrastructure to our cities? And then we are all worried about, oh, flooding is happening and so on and so forth. I mean, I did so many podcasts and so many newspaper articles around just flooding alone. And it's something as basic as the width of the drainage pipes. That needs to expand because the climate change has forced us that there's more rain within a shorter span of time. One is that. Then you have to get rid of the solid waste prior to that, prior to the monsoon season. Then you have to get rid of the solid waste because that will block it. Then you will also have to make room for the river. So there was a Dutch concept. They had this Delta Works, which is a number of civil engineering projects in Netherlands, which sort of ensured that their cities were not flooded. And one of the projects within this was Room for River, where they ensured that the natural course of the river is not disturbed in Netherlands. So we have to think on those lines. I mean, I can go on. I mean, pick any topic. I think I am just going all over the place. Pick any topic that you want to talk about, and like I'm very optimistic about how the global labor movement. Like, people are upset that so many Indians have sort of moved out of India and are going to different countries and so on. I'm not upset. That is the nature of cities. That is the nature of migration. Countries, nation states, it's a recent phenomenon. It's a 600, 700-year-old concept after Treaty of Westphalia, right? Nation states that, oh, Italy is different, India is different. It's that kind of a thing. Yes, the sense of identity of being an Italian and being an Indian has been different since forever. That's one thing. But the idea that you need a visa to go and work there is something, it's very, very recent. And I think until the First World War, you didn't even need visas or something, right? Someone told me. Anyway, point being that people will still go from India to Italy or London or wherever they want to be. And just we are saying from villages to cities or one city to another in India, they will do it globally also. So they're all following laws of the market and the economics, and they're all looking out for themselves. It's not bad. But my point is that they will come back, even if a fraction of it will come back, or even if there's a knowledge transfer of what's going right there, right, in those cities. And that is sort of, that percolates into urban governance here in India. A lot of those things will improve. So I'm very bullish on it. And there are a bunch of, like, honestly, I think I'm getting all over the place. Utkarsh, now you'll have to point me to a particular sector and then I'll tell you.
No, this is all very helpful. We deliberately planned this to be a free-flowing discussion around the big ideas for India. Let me throw the spotlight back on Bhanu, who wants to follow up.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to reconfirm what Devashish is saying. So Devashish, you were sort of saying that cities are, I mean, belonging to a city is a much older phenomena than belonging to a nation state, right? That's what you were trying to say.
Not really. I mean, although largely it is true. Okay, there are two parts to it. First of all, when I was referring to 600, 700 years, all the Treaty of Westphalia thing, I essentially was referring to the fact that the administrative boundaries, the sense of community of being a part of one particular country or a civilization is one other thing, right? But the fact that you need visa to go work and and work at some particular country or city, that is something very, very recent, right? And they continue, and people will continue to migrate and so on. So one is that. So one is administrative part of it. The other is identity part of it. Identity part of it is since forever old, right? Since the advent of time. And not the advent of time, actually, 10,000 years, honestly. We are just like, even humans just try to exaggerate their importance on Earth. So it's just not the advent of time, but maybe 10,000 years old, right? So one is the sense of identity. The sense, the work, the part about visa is something, I'm something saying that it's something much more recent. The administrative boundaries. So one is administrative part, the other is identity part. But when it comes to the city, people believing that they belong to city more than a country, I completely agree. And the book sort of reflects on it time and again, that, and I also just mentioned it a couple of minutes ago, that if you ask someone, a Sicilian in Italy and someone from Florence in Italy would identify themselves as very different beings. A New Yorker in America and someone who's living in Cambridge in America, they would be very, very different. And that's why a lot of times because you are impacted by your local community, your local infrastructure, your local politics, your local identities. And you cannot, I mean, look at India alone. I mean, Would I relate to any other city? No, I would still continue to stick on to my Lucknow identity. And so would be Mumbaikars, so would be Bangaloreans, so would be people from Hyderabad and so on and so forth. And so I guess, yeah, in some ways, the identity of a city, and I would also add the identity of language, is something that goes beyond the identity of a country in many ways.
Thanks, Devashish.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Any final thoughts or comments or suggestions for millennials and Gen Zs all around India and the world listening to this? How would you want them to apply some of these lessons to their work life or daily life?
I would say that I mean, not me, I think a lot of people say this, but it is an interesting time to be an Indian, and it is an interesting time to be in India. Or I would add one more maxim, that it is also an interesting time to be working on something that is related to India, right? The three maxims, and it's something that is now largely accepted, right? And the book sort of builds on that. And I would just simply say that, that I would tell to the other folks that, just build on the story. You are seeing a change. I mean, what we were seeing 20 years ago about China is not at that pace, because there are different factors and so on. But it's also very interesting that has ever been such a big democracy gone through such a change. Actually, the last big democracy was like America, and that was like the transition. It happened in America was from 1870 to 1920. The big urbanization change that happened there. And now it's happening 100 years, literally 100 years later, and of a country which is 5 times the size. In fact, I don't think so. US was 300. I don't think so. It was probably 150, 80 million. I don't know what was the population of America then.
I believe 100 million. Yeah.
100 million, right? And then we have 15 times of that right now. So it's a very interesting time to see how things unfold. One is that. The other is that cities, it might be a book about cities, but it's a commentary on Indian political economy. So anyone who's interested in India and how it is sort of positioned for the future, what are our binding constraints, what are something that was going to propel our growth for the next couple of decades. If you're interested in that, you might find a good friend in the book. That is something that I'd say. The third is debate it out. I mean, disagree with me, but I would want that conversation about cities to really go up, because we really do not give them enough space and then just blame. It's like having, I don't know, one kid and not feeding that kid enough, not training that kid enough, and just saying that it's not performing well. It's unkind, honestly, to a certain extent. So one is that. And one thing that I would say is that while it is a commentary on Indian political economy, now I'm going to further zoom out. It is also a lesson on cities worldwide, and rather urbanization worldwide. And that's why I strongly recommend this book called Triumph of the City by Edward Glaser. He's a Harvard professor. And he's also a big champion of cities. But I would simply say that this book was written on this very desk when COVID was raging in India, the first, second, third waves and so on. And people were writing obit of cities one after another. And every day, my motivation to write this book back then was like, it's not going to end, because what bubonic plague could not end, what World War I and II could not end, what communism could not end, and so on. A pandemic like COVID-19 can definitely not end, right? And you have to look at the long arc of political economy and civilization to understand that cities are very important. And Lewis Mumford said that cities, that villages invented fair bit of things, not way too many, but one of their inventions was cities. So city was an invention of a village, but probably the city has undone its progenitor in some ways, that it has made it redundant. And I'm not saying that. Someone asked me, a very leading journalist asked me a couple of weeks ago, that are you saying cities are going to be there or not? Villages are going to be there or not? Villages are of course going to be there. They are in Europe, they are in America, there will be everywhere. But no one should be forced to live in a village, because everyone deserves a shot at better living, at better wages, at better quality of life, and so do their successive generations. And cities is something that can provide that. Cities come with a lot of fault lines: safety, inclusivity, climate change related issues, emission issues, and so on. But there's nothing that cannot be addressed, first. And second is, the book is not about comparing a village to a city out and out. It is also about comparing a well-functioning city to a poorly functioning city. And that's why the book might have a fair bit of global relevance, because as I mentioned in the second chapter, that there are 7 trends that I've identified that will sort of influence the global political economy because of what's happening in Indian cities, including, how a voter decides to vote in America. And I might be making very loud sort of projections here. And
go for it. Yeah.
Panditri is probably would take you that far only. But I'll say that, how America votes, it does influence election worldwide, the impressions worldwide. A country as big as India, with the leaders and elections and party offices and schemes going beyond the budget of some very big economies now, right? So what's happening in India and how an Indian voter decides to vote, what happens to liberalism, conservatism, whatever you might want to call it, across economic and social paradigms, what happens in India will influence the voters worldwide. So it's just not consumers, it's just not CEOs, it's just not migrants, it's just not remittances, it's just not, average Joe business issue. No, it's hardcore fundamental existence of how the voters are going to vote. Will be the Indian elections will be more and more closely watched as our American elections. It's just not about our economic power. It's also because 1.5 billion people voting and largely urban population voting, and a country that is coming out from millennia of legacy issues, and that would all unfold, that the theater will be Indian cities. So on that note, I'll conclude that.
What a fascinating conversation, Devashish. Thank you very much for sharing these ideas and topics of discussion and debate. And I'm very sure that our community members will love it.